A Russian Mi-8 helicopter that was sent to help the downed Russian Su-25 aircraft in eastern Ukraine on Saturday has been shot by a Ukrainian drone, Telegram channel reported. The Mi-8 helicopter involved in evacuation was stopped by Ukrainian drone strikes. The relevant footage has been circulated in Ukrainian Telegram channels. The helicopter abandoned the evacuation group that it transported to the site of crash. As a result of Ukrainian drone attacks, the Russian helicopter left the area and is in need of considerable repairs, according to Ukrainian reports. Russian Su-25 aircraft was downed by Igla Zenith missile complex in Torit city in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region. The downing of Su-25 marks the first reported downing of a Russian Su-25 in several months. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Ukrainian soldiers have already destroyed 369 Russian army aircraft since the beginning of the full-scale war in 2022. Ukrainian air defense units have shot down a Russian Su-25 close air support aircraft in Toretsk city in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region, press service of the 28th Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces reported on Saturday. Soldiers of the 28th Brigade have destroyed an enemy Su-25. Another Russian attack aircraft has been eliminated on the Toretsk front thanks to our air defense forces, the brigade's statement posted on Telegram reads. Further details are expected to be released later in a video update, the brigade stated. A video has been released showing the aircraft crash to the ground after being struck. This marks the first reported downing of a Russian Su-25 in several months. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Ukrainian soldiers have already destroyed 369 Russian army aircraft since the beginning of the full-scale war in 2022. The armed forces have also shot down 331 Russian helicopters.
Agents of the Atesh partisan movement within the Russian military report that commanders have begun pulling air defense units from occupied Crimea back to Russia. The Atesh movement reported the information on Telegram. This decision was dictated not only by the strikes of the Ukrainian defense forces on oil depots and military infrastructure, but also by public pressure inside Russia. The statement says, according to the guerrillas, some of the systems, including those of the 31st Air Defense Division, are already being moved from the peninsula to new positions. According to the guerrilla movement, the Russians realized that this step creates critical gaps in the defense of Crimea, but they have no other choice. As a result, airfields, military depots, and the Kerch Bridge remain vulnerable. The attacks of the Ukrainian long-range drones demonstrate that Putin's regime is unable to protect military facilities in the Belgorod, Kursk, Voronezh regions, and other regions of Russia. They have to take risks, as the loss of oil depots and logistics hubs in Russia is already reaching a critical point. Putin's regime may lose the ability to effectively supply its troops with fuel, which will inevitably affect their combat capability at the front. Atesh emphasizes, recall Ukrainian forces struck many air defense systems in Russian-occupied Crimea. The Ukrainian military recently hit several S-300, S-350 and S-400 air defense systems. Ukraine also struck more than 15 radar stations and over 10 control centers stationed in the Russian-occupied peninsula. The military sites were located in Crimean settlements Chornomorsk, Tartankut, Yevpatoria, Saki, Donsky, Belbek, Sevastopol, Alushta, Zankoy, Mysov, and near Ipetri Peak, according to the map published by Ukraine's Center for Strategic Communications. Ukraine has carried out several successful attacks against Russian targets in occupied Crimea and its vicinity, heavily degrading the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Ukrainian intelligence conducted large-scale strikes on Russian bases in Crimea. In this way, the troops wanted to force Russia to redeploy additional air defense assets from the front. Ukraine insists that the strikes on Crimea, which have targeted Russian naval bases and vessels, are an integral part of their counter-offensive strategy intended to try to isolate the peninsula and make it more difficult for Russia to sustain its military operations on the Ukrainian mainland. After Ukrainian troops unexpectedly seized part of Russia's Kursk region this summer, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared that the country's defense ministry's main task was to repel the invasion. 6 months have passed, and the Russians are still trying to fulfill their dictator's task. Bloomberg writes, Putin's failure to expel the Ukrainian army from Russian territory may take on added significance as US President Donald Trump presses for a deal to end the war. While Russian troops continue to steadily advance onto the battlefield in eastern Ukraine, Kiev is preserving the Kursk region as a bargaining chip for a potential territorial swap in any negotiations, the article emphasizes. The publication notes that the first occupation of Russian territory since World War II is a personal failure for Putin, since his domestic image is based on the fact that he is a strong leader who defends the interests of the nation. In general, the effectiveness of military operations is lower than expected. The system was not particularly prepared, neither for the loss of territory nor for the fact that everything would drag on, said Mikhail Vinogradov, head of the Petersburg Politics Foundation. At the same time, Bloomberg notes that the fighting covers only a small area of the Kursk region. However, the Ukrainian offensive in a region with a population of about 1 million people was shocking for Russians, who in the third year of the war felt the consequences of the invasion that Putin launched. In turn, Russian officials estimated that about 150,000 people in the Kursk region had fled their homes due to the fighting. Discontent with the state's inability to protect its citizens is also growing. In January, for example, hundreds of people took to the streets in Kursk and complained that officials were doing little to accommodate displaced people or help them find missing relatives. There is a war going on in our country, and the state turned out to be absolutely unprepared for this, starting from fortifications and ending with housing certificates, said Vladimir Sinelikov, a Kursk activist and volunteer involved in searching for missing persons in the territories occupied by Ukraine. However, Nikolai Petrov, a consultant at the London-based think tank Chatham House, noted that the Kremlin views the Kursk region as a regional problem, not a national one. This means there is no rush, he explained. Although the Kursk operation failed to halt Russia's advance in eastern Ukraine, the Kremlin sent thousands of troops to try to push Ukrainian forces out of the region. This could weigh on Putin as Trump pressures him to make a deal to end the war and threatens big new sanctions if he refuses, the article stressed.